Hey guys, so UFC Fight Night Usman versus Buckley is happening this weekend. I'm going to run through the card and give you guys my picks and predictions for all of the fights, so let's just jump straight into it. And first up is Jamey-Lyn Horth versus Vanessa Demopoulos. So Jamey-Lyn Horth coming off a very impressive fight against Miranda Maverick, where neither really threw much on the feet. The striking was slightly edged towards Maverick, but Maverick was usually the one taking down Horth, but Horth did have better sort of ground control. Very, very close fight, especially in that second round. Horth looked a bit better on the ground, but in the end the decision rolled round and Horth lost that one. Maverick won just primarily through looking better on the feet. Before that she had a very close fight with Ivana Petrovic, who I don't think is the toughest opponent in the world, but in that fight Horth definitely won the second with her grappling, making a good argument for her winning the first and third, but overall she did get outperformed on the feet, and when it was standing she kept getting taken down. But in the end, she took a split decision for that one. She does have moments on the feet. With her fight with Veronica Hardy, she ended via a split decision, primarily due just to Horth winning on the feet in the first and putting up a decent fight the whole time on the feet, as well as mixing in her grappling, but ultimately she lost that one as well. Vanessa Demopoulos coming off a very bad loss to Talita Alencar, where she would get taken down every round and beat up on the ground using ground and pound, and she never really had a moment to strike on the feet. She lost that one by a decision pretty dominantly. Before that she fought Jacqueline Amarim in a fight that she would also get taken down to the ground very easily, and then in 3 minutes into the first round she got submitted by an armbar. I think Amarim is incredibly skilled though as a grappler, and that her submission game is sort of some of the best in that whole division. She's very skilled on a hot win streak, all first round finishes. So yeah, bad loss, but not to the worst opponent. Before that, Demopoulos actually picked up a win against Emily Ducote, but it was a very close split decision where Demopoulos was able to strike on the feet, her best area, without getting taken down, and it still ended in a close split decision. So there is that. And ultimately, I just think Demopoulos is way too one-dimensional for someone who can mix it up as much as Horth, and will probably lose through being taken down and held on bottom position. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Jamey-Lyn Horth by a decision win. And next up on the prelims, we have Phil Rowe versus Ange Loosa. So Phil Rowe coming off a fight against Jake Matthews at UFC 302, where he got beat up pretty badly on the feet the whole fight, even got taken down in the third round, with him arguably only winning the first, but he also did get outstruck that round, so it is debatable. Before that, he had a surprisingly close fight against Neil Magny on the feet. It was very close to even, and Rowe even looked slightly better on the ground at points, even managing to take Magny down in the second, but he lost that one primarily just through not doing enough in a fight where there was very little activity from both ends. In a pretty decent performance on the feet though, he did get a TKO victory against Nico Price, where in the first and second round it was a decently close striking battle, with Rowe getting taken down in the second and almost submitted, but in the third he actually ended up getting Price against a cage and started throwing wildly and was trying to put him out. The ref jumped in, stopped the fight, TKO win for Rowe. Very impressive win, that one. His opponent Ange Loosa recently got beat up pretty badly by Gabriel Bonfim for 3 whole rounds, with Loosa taking Bonfim down 3 times in the first round, managing to sort of make an argument for that round. But outside that, he didn't have any real moment where he was looking dominant for the rest of the fight. He lost that one by a pretty clear-cut decision. Before that, he had a pretty interesting fight, to say the least, with Brian Battle. He ended up getting a no contest for that one due to an eye poke, but prior to the eye poke, Battle was beating up on Loosa pretty badly. It did seem like Loosa was going to get beat in that fight, but he sort of took the easy way out. That's what it really looks like here. So realistically, Battle probably would have won that one. Before that, he actually picked up a decision win over Reese McKee in a fight where on the feet he was getting beat up in the striking, but every round he managed to get McKee on the ground and would land some really nice ground and pound, and he just didn't let McKee get back to the feet whenever sort of he'd take him down. That's an area where McKee would thrive, and even in the later rounds, Loosa actually turned up and started doing some real damage to McKee on the feet. And while I don't think either of these fighters are amazing in the striking particularly, I think Rowe is slightly better, and I think that in this fight it will ultimately come down to the wrestling and takedowns, an area which I think Loosa is much better. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Ange Loosa by a decision win. Next up is Ricky Simone versus Cameron Smotherman. So Ricky Simone recently fraud-checked Javid Basharat. He was sort of an up-and-coming prospect within the division at the time. And in this fight, Simone got taken down pretty early in the fight, which made it look pretty bad for him. But when it got back to the feet, he landed a clean right directly on the chin of Basharat, put him out cold, put him out badly, completely sort of flipped the odds on that one. Before that, he had a pretty fun fight with Vinicius Oliveira, where he was getting beat up on the feet every round, but would mix in the occasional takedown to make the fight more competitive. But ultimately, he lost that one by a decision, with his striking just not being enough to overcome the skilled sort of striking of Oliveira. Something similar happened in his fight with Mario Batista, who was a very good opponent and has recently been put in the upper echelons of the division. But in that fight, he got outstruck every round. He occasionally landed his own big shots and takedowns here and there, but ultimately he just couldn't compete with Batista's volume and technicality, and he lost that one by a pretty clear decision. Onto his opponent, Cameron Smotherman had a very impressive win against, Jake Hadley. In his debut fight, who I think is a very tough opponent and very well-rounded, tricky to figure out, especially for a debut. And Smotherman ultimately won that one just by outstriking Hadley in the first and third. Hadley did look better on the feet in the second, and he was also throwing in a few takedowns in the second, but he got a point deduction for eye poke, so he ended up losing that round. So Smotherman was sort of 3-0. And took that one by a very clear decision. His fight after that was significantly less impressive. He took on Sehi Saidi in a fight where he let himself get beat up on the feet the whole fight. In the third, he came back and managed to sort of land some big shots and tried to take the fight back, but Saidi was also taking him down a lot in this fight, and it was pretty clear that he won the first two very dominantly. Smotherman lost that one by a decision, and while I think there's a lot of potential in someone like Smotherman, Simone's just very dangerous, and I think stepping up late notice against someone like Simone is a really, really bad idea. So I'm going to have to go with Ricky Simone for this one by a round 2 KO. Up next is Cody Durden versus Jose Ochoa. So Cody Durden most recently fought Josh Van at UFC 310 in a fight where he got beat up pretty badly. He would get these takedowns and they'd provide moments where it wasn't so one-sided, but when it returned to the feet, Van just pieced him up in a style that, Van's very good at. He'll outvolume his way to a win, absolutely beat on his opponent. He doesn't really finish, but either way, Van took a very clear-cut decision that fight. Before that, he actually got a very impressive ninja choke submission on Matt Schnell early in the second round. But for one, it's Matt Schnell. Guy's very easy to put away. We've seen it with all his other fights, Steve Erceg, all these other fights he gets put away sort of early in the fight. And two, the first round was very, very close. Schnell was actually arguably beating Durden on the feet prior to the finish. So while it was a good win, it sort of wasn't indicative of the whole fight. And while that Schnell win was very good, his fight before against Bruno Silva was just another fight where he got beat up in the striking and then ultimately put away in the second with a perfectly placed uppercut. So he's not the best of opponents. Jose Ochoa, this will be his second fight within the UFC, and his first was against Lona Kavanagh in a fairly competitive bout where Kavanagh just took it through being the better striker. Ochoa was bringing it to him in the feet though. He was putting up a very good fight in an area that usually Kavanagh reigns supreme in. And he even had a moment in the second where he got Kavanagh down and almost submitted him, but ultimately couldn't get it done. Kavanagh's very, very skilled, and I think he is like a big prospect within that division. And while I think Ochoa, he's on one within the UFC currently, I think he consistently goes to closer fights than Durden does. Durden usually gets finished or just beat up, and it's usually a one-way decision to his opponents. At least Ochoa makes it competitive and sort of brings the fight to his opponents. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Jose Ochoa by a decision win. Yeah. And up next is Malcolm Wellmaker versus Kris Moutinho. So Malcolm Wellmaker made his debut against Cameron Simon recently after coming off a brutal knockout on the Contender Series. He landed this perfectly timed right hook that put his opponent out cold. And in this fight with Simon, he managed to push him back against the cage the whole round before halfway through the round, landing this massive right hook in a very similar fashion that put Simon out and sent him flying across the octagon. I think Simon's a very talented fighter as well, and I was really surprised that this sort of Contender Series debuter managed to do that to someone like Cameron Simon. So he is very, very impressive, and he does have sort of a big hype behind him. His opponent Kris Moutinho hasn't fought in the UFC since 2022, where in his debut fight he stepped up late notice against Sean O'Malley. And this is a very memorable fight. We all know how bad of a beatdown it was. O'Malley was just beating him up the whole time for 3 whole rounds, landing absolutely everything on Moutinho. Moutinho just didn't look ready at all, and he was stepping up late notice, so that probably explains it. But O'Malley ended up getting a third round TKO finish, closed out the fight with 30 seconds left with that. And yeah, it was domination from O'Malley. After that, he got paired up against a more manageable opponent in Guido Canetti, where very early in the fight, Moutinho just got pushed back against the cage and got finished on the feet via a TKO. Very similar fashion to O'Malley, and it is clear that he just isn't ready for the UFC at that point. Although he did have a pretty nice chin on him though, that was the only plus side. That's the only real reason why he wasn't getting finished earlier. But in the meantime, he's actually picked up some very impressive wins on the regional scene and these lesser known promotions, and recently got re-signed. And while I do think he will come back better and sort of a bit more composed, Wellmaker is not an easy first opponent to re-debut against. Wellmaker is very, very dangerous. And he has a lot of power in his hands, and I think Wellmaker is going to take this one pretty dominantly. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Malcolm Wellmaker by a round 1 KO. And moving on, we have Michael Chiesa versus Court McGee. So Michael Chiesa coming off a somewhat surprising win over Max Griffin, where most of the fight was spent on the ground. Chiesa was usually being dominant in the sort of ground game, holding dominant position. Until in round 3, Chiesa locked in this rear naked choke and ended the fight. He just looked superior in the grappling to Griffin, and Griffin didn't really have a chance to strike that fight. And Chiesa's submissions are usually his best weapon, and it's usually what he looks for in these fights. Tony Ferguson's an example. Halfway through the round, he got Ferguson to the ground. Ferguson was actually winning on the feet, but the minute it gets to the ground, Ferguson got put in a rear naked choke, ended up tapping. Oh my god, my poor guy. But yeah, back on the feet, he does have some major issues. It was seen with the Kevin Holland fight. Kevin Holland absolutely beat the brakes off him in the striking. Chiesa was constantly shooting him for takedowns and getting denied. And then eventually, Holland actually ended up locking a dash choke and submitting Chiesa halfway through the first round. So when he fights these more well-rounded people that don't rely on one sort of base, he does sort of struggle. His opponent, Court McGee, had a very good performance to open up UFC 307, where he managed to submit Tim Means halfway through the first round, in a fight where he was winning on the feet before taking Means down and taking the back, ending the fight very quick via rear naked choke. Before that, he had a pretty bad performance against Alex Morono, where he got beat up badly on the feet in the first and third rounds. He only won the second through his ground game. But he also did get beat in the wrestling in the third, so there wasn't really an area where McGee excelled in that fight, and he ended up losing that decision. And his biggest flaw is his striking. When being matched up against sort of dangerous strikers we've seen, as with Matt Brown, McGee sort of looked good in the first round with his wrestling, but when it got back to the feet, Brown landed flush on the chin of McGee and put him down and out badly. He actually won a bonus for that one. And overall, while I think that neither McGee or Chiesa are really dominant on the feet, I think it will come down to their wrestling. And on the ground, I just think Chiesa's a bit more dangerous. He has a bit more of a submission threat than McGee, who will usually just ride it out to a decision. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Michael Chiesa by a round 2 submission. And closing out the prelims, we have Paul Craig versus Rodolfo Pilato. So I've already given my prediction on this fight. It was supposed to happen for the UFC Fight Night Burns versus Morales card. Right now there'll be a link to my prediction video for that if you want to see my take on that one. But most of the points I still do agree with. I still stand by a lot of what I said in that video. I do think I underrated Craig a bit in that one. And that fight being cancelled, the reason for it has actually made me a bit concerned. Pilato had to pull out of that one because he was suffering medical sort of conditions brought on by, and get ready for this, herpes. So that's something that you don't really heal from. It's not like an injury where you come back and you might not be performing 100%. Like, this is something that you don't really bounce back from completely. And I do think it will sort of be haunting Pilato. Pilato's, had a few fights where he's had to pull out due to medical issues, and it probably is related to this in hindsight. So due to his ongoing issues medically, I kind of want to switch my pick. So for that reason, I'm going to change my prediction to Paul Craig, and I'm going to say he's going to get it done by a round 3 submission. And opening up the main card, we have Alonzo Menifield versus Oumar Sy. So Alonzo Menifield coming off a really close split decision win over Julius Walker in a very scrappy brawl where they sort of stayed on the feet for a lot of the fight. It was roughly even. Both fighters were landing big and sort of eating these huge shots, with Menifield looking the best in the strike in the third and Walker sort of mixing in these takedowns in the second. But ultimately it went to Menifield. He just looked a bit busier in the first and won that one by a split decision. Prior to this, he was coming off 2 very, very bad back-to-back performances. Both ended in knockouts that won his opponent's performance bonuses, with the one to Carlos Ulberg being especially bad. He instantly got pushed up against the cage and then knocked out 12 seconds into the fight. Yeah, very, very quick fight. Menifield didn't really put up any fight within that fight. And yeah, very, very bad performance from him. Good performance from Ulberg. Ulberg's very good though, so kind of a dangerous opponent for that one. He does have some good performances, so Menifield put up a very decent fight against Justin Jacoby in a 3-round fight where he was landing some big shots throughout the fight. Jacoby was winning the first in the striking before Menifield edged out the second in the striking, and then absolutely dominated the third, even managing to knock Jacoby down for that one, so he secured a very clear decision for that one. His opponent Oumar side, only 2 fights within the UFC. He won both of them with his debut against Tuco Tokos being an absolute domination in the wrestling, where early in the first round Tokos got taken down and Sai managed to lock in a rear naked choke against the cage while Tokos was trying to get back to the feet. His fight after that against Dawoon Jung was also a pretty dominant performance, with Sai winning clearly on the feet for all 3 rounds and even mixing in some takedowns in the first and third to take it to a decision where it was just one-way traffic. And I think Sai's very well rounded, and he's going to be very tricky for a Menifield to figure out. And while I think Menifield will put up a good fight on the feet, I think Sai has the ability to mix it up a bit better with takedowns and wrestling, and I think that will very much help him to sort of reset the momentum of Menifield whenever it gets hairy in the striking. So for that reason, I'm going to go for Oumar Sai by a decision win. And up next is Mansur Abdul-Malik versus Cody Brundage. So Mansur Abdul-Malik, only 2 fights within the UFC, with his first fight against Dusko Todorovic being a one-way beatdown, where he sort of put a bow on that fight by finishing Todorovic with a brutal knee down the middle as he ducked in for a takedown, put him out cold, all within the first half of the first round. After that, he had a pretty rocky performance against Nick Klein, where he was clearly losing the first round just through the striking and being taken down and held down for a good portion of that round. But then the second, Malik came back majorly and rocked Klein with a brutal shot down the middle before TKO finishing him when he backed up against the cage. His opponent Cody Brundage had an absolute brutal war with Julian Marquez recently, where for the whole fight they were just trying to kill each other. They were trying to put each other out cold. They punched the mouthpieces out of each other's mouths multiple times and continued to brawl even without mouth guards. Before the end of the first, Brundage landed this really nice counter punch while against the cage that dropped Marquez before he finished up the fight with some ground and pound. Very, very good performance from him, very dangerous opponent. Before that fight, he got fed to the wolves at UFC 300 in a fight where stylistically he got put up against the worst possible opponent he could in Bo Nickel, in a fight that smelled of a layup the minute it got announced, and it went about how you'd expect. Brundage wasn't really able to get anything off on the feet, got held down the whole fight, and then got submitted with a rear naked choke halfway through the second. But the fight right before that, he got a brutal slam KO over Zachary Reese, where he beat up on Reese on the feet, and when Reese started attempting this head triangle, Brundage picks him up, slams Reese against the canvas, finishes the fight in 1 round. Very, very impressive. And while I think Malik is a very dangerous opponent and a very competent striker, that Klein fight, it just really sort of presented some holes in his striking game. And if he tries to enter into a firefight with Brundage, I think he's going to get caught, and he's going to get caught hard. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Cody Brundage by round 1 KO. Next up, we have Cody Garbrandt versus Raoni Barcelos. So Cody Garbrandt, back in the day, very, very feared champion, very feared bantamweight, very talented with his striking, and he was arguably one of the best strikers at the time. In his fight against Dominic Cruz, the one we all know so well, he showed just how skillful he was with the footwork, with his hands, with his head movement, the power in his fists. He took the belt off Cruz in a fight where he looked absolutely unbeatable and Cruz looked absolutely hopeless. Amazing win, but following the TJ Dillashaw loss and him losing the belt, he really went on a bad run. He sort of would lose 2 fights, win 1 and then just lose another 2. But his fight at UFC 296 did present a shimmer of hope for Garbrandt. He got a really nasty first round knockout over Brian Kelleher, who, while not the best opponent, Garbrandt looked absolutely great in this one. He clocked him with a right hook straight to the head as he was against the cage and slept him really badly that fight, put him out cold. And while his most recent performance against Davison Figueiredo ended with him being submitted in the second round, he was putting up a pretty good fight before that, especially on the feet, but realistically he just couldn't deal with the takedowns from Figueiredo and the wrestling, and ultimately that's how he sort of got the fight ended on him. Raoni Barcelos most recently came over an absolute fraud check over a big time bantamweight, biggest prospect I'd say in bantamweight at the time, Payne Talbot, with
Talbot being one of the sort of biggest names, he looked like he was shooting up to that top 5 ranking anytime soon. And Barcelos just absolutely exposed that Talbot had no grappling. All 3 rounds, Talbot got held down, got taken down, almost got submitted in the first and third. And even in the third, Barcelos actually outstruck Talbot just through landing really big ground and pound. He was sort of striking with Talbot at the start of the round, took him down, landed some really nice ground and pound, won that fight very dominantly, 30-27. Before that, he had a fight with Christian Quinones, where he did decent on the feet in that one early, but then once again, his grappling was what carried him through. Barcelos actually began doing better in the striking as the fight went on though. He submitted Quinones in the third as well by rear naked choke. Another decently dominant performance. And while usually his grappling is enough to carry him through fights, sometimes he does let himself get beat on the feet, especially when it comes to more well-rounded opponents who sort of counteract his grappling. It was the case with Kyler Phillips. In that fight, he was consistently sort of taking down Phillips, but the minute it would get back to the feet and Phillips would defend the takedowns, Barcelos was getting beat up, and Barcelos actually even got knocked down at a point in that fight. In a fight that was realistically one-way traffic on the feet, lost that one pretty convincingly. And while I do think Garbrandt does still have it in him, I think he sort of needs to mix up his game a bit more. He leans way too heavily on his striking, and while it is really, really good striking, I can see a similar thing happening as it did in the Talbot fight, with Barcelos just using takedowns to prevent any striking threat from happening. He's exposed his opponent's grapplings before, and he can expose it again. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Raoni Barcelos by a decision win for this one. And next up is Edmen Shahbazyan versus Andre Petroski. So Edmen Shahbazyan earlier this year got a very brutal knockout, performance-winning knockout over Dylan Budka, who isn't the most amazing opponent, but in that fight, it was just an absolute domination from Shahbazyan, and he got to put Dylan Budka out badly a minute and a bit into the fight with this nice counter. And while Shahbazyan's striking is no joke, there are some flaws in his grappling game that are a little bit worrying. They were exploited by Gerald Meerschaert when they fought. Shahbazyan was dominating on the feet for sort of the first 2 rounds, but midway through the second round, he got taken down while he was sort of distracted with the striking. And on the ground, Meerschaert easily found an arm triangle opportunity and took it. He submitted Shahbazyan with a minute left in that second round, and ultimately looked very, very dominant the minute the fight got to the ground. But usually I think his striking is enough to make up for his lack of wrestling. His power in his hands is definitely sort of his biggest advantage, and he can put opponents out very easily. It happened with AJ Dobson when they fought. In the first round, Shahbazyan knocked Dobson down and then dazed him badly and followed up with some vicious ground and pound to finish that fight via TKO, so he is very, very dangerous. His opponent, Andre Petroski, a fairly well-rounded fighter, with most recent fight against Rodolfo Vieira showing a level of striking proficiency. He beat Vieira on the feet for most of that fight and demonstrated some really, really good takedown defense. He defended 10 of Vieira's 11 takedown attempts this fight, and ultimately took that one by a decision. And while he didn't get to wrestle in that Vieira fight, he is a very skilled wrestler, and he usually thrives in that area. It's the reason he beat Dylan Budka. He took him down every round and held him there for most of the fight, just held him on bottom position and sort of landed some ground and pound. But there wasn't really much outside of that, but he took that by a decision. And that's a running trend with this fight. He isn't really a finisher and would prefer to just use this wrestling to push him through to a decision. Make it even on the feet as well. He's not that bad at striking. And this is what happened with this fight with Josh Fremd. He took him down every round, held him down on bottom position, and even sort of almost submitted him in the second. He does also present a bit of a submission threat, but not that badly. And while I think Shahbazyan does struggle with these wrestlers, and his opponents most likely will sort of look better than him in the wrestling, Petroski is very skilled in that area as well, may I add. Shahbazyan has this like really good takedown defense, and the power in his hands usually stops fights before anyone gets a chance to take him down. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Edmen Shahbazyan by around 1 KO for this one. And now the co-main event, Rose Namajunas versus Miranda Maverick. So Rose Namajunas, veteran within the UFC. She's a 2-time UFC women's strawweight champion. And her second time winning the belt was coming off a very, very impressive first round head kick over Zhang Weili. Knocked her out badly with that one, and she was able to finish this absolute boogeyman like it was nothing. And then she even managed to get defense on the belt when they ran back the rematch a year later, and not anyone can beat Zhang Weili. Zhang Weili is very dominant. She still is to this day. You've seen what she's done to her recent opponents, and the fact that Namajunas was able to get her out of there is very, very impressive. Recently though, she's moved to flyweight. and she's had a little less success. It seems like she's sort of growing into this division, and her first fight was against Menifield, who had recently fought for the belt. And that fight was decently close. Fiorot looked to be landing sort of the better, harder punches, which ultimately won her the fight. But Namajunas was putting up a good fight, but I think overall she just struggled with the physicality of this new division. But as she's got more and more fights, recently she's sort of picked up some good wins in the division, with her most recent being over Tracy Cortez. In a fight that was a last minute fill-in, Namajunas was originally meant to fight Macy Barber, swapped out last minute for Cortez, but in that fight it was just a complete beatdown. Cortez got beat pretty much every round, maybe not the fifth. She even knocked down Cortez very early in the first round and just beat her down pretty much for the rest of the time. Even implemented some takedowns and wrestling in the final 3 rounds as well to make it even more dominant. Very clear-cut win for Namajunas, and yeah, she looks pretty good in the flyweight division now. Miranda Maverick coming off a very competitive bout with Jamey-Lyn Horth, who's actually fighting earlier on the card, where a lot of the fight was spent in the grappling on the ground. The first round was a striking battle that Maverick won, but the second was a bit worse for Maverick, with Horth sort of dominating on the ground, almost submitting Maverick, and ultimately Maverick just took back the third through her striking and sort of taking down Horth, winning that decision. Before that, she fought Diane Barbosa, where once again she won on the feet for all 3 rounds, but there were moments on the ground where she sort of looked a bit in trouble, almost being submitted in the second round, but ultimately her striking carried her through to a decision win that one. And I think her biggest issue in her fights is a reliance too heavy on striking, with lesser skilled grapplers trying to take her down when they usually succeed. And in her fights with sort of Jasmine Jasuda-Vicious, an incredibly skilled grappler, not only did she just get controlled on the ground for the first round, she actually got beat up in the third. I find that when she tries wrestling, she usually gasses herself out a little bit and lets the later rounds run away from her. So that could be a threat in this fight. And while I think Miranda Maverick is very good on the feet, her opponents are not even close to those of Namajunas. Namajunas has a resume filled with names like Fiorot, Rebus, Cortez, Welly, Blanchfield. Meanwhile, Miranda Maverick's best win is maybe Jamey-Lyn Horth. There's some good ones early in her career, but it's early on fights against early on fighters. So yeah, I just think Namajunas is more skilled, has been around longer, knows sort of the ropes a bit better, and will ultimately be able to mix it up a bit more. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Rose Namajunas by a decision win for this one. And now on to the main event, Kamaru Usman versus Joaquin Buckley. So Kamaru Usman, one of the greatest welterweights to exist, with a resume as champion that includes names such as Masvidal. He fought him twice. Got a brutal knockout over him. Gilbert Burns, he beat. Tyron Woodley, he beat to get the belt. He capped off with 2 fights with Colby Covington, with the rematch being a display of how good Usman's striking is. He beat up on Colby that whole fight. Knocked him down twice in that second round, and Colby just wasn't able to get anything off. Maybe in the 4th round he looked a bit better than Usman, but Usman was just defending anything Colby would throw at him and took that one very dominantly. But his reign as champion came cut short when he fought Leon Edwards. Everyone knows the head kick KO, it's famous at this point. And this was in a fight that Edwards was losing 4 rounds, with really him looking defeated by the end of that 4th round. The KO came out of nowhere, stripped Usman of his belt, and the new welterweight champion was Leon Edwards. And then when they ran that back in the rematch, granted it was a very, very close fight, but ultimately Edwards successfully defended the belt. Usman got knocked out of the title picture, and since then Usman hasn't fought since October of 2023, in which he had a very unfortunate matchup. He was filling in late notice for a fight with Khamzat Chimaev, and on top of that, it wasn't even at his weight division, it was at middleweight. So in that fight, all the cards were stacked up against him, and to his credit, he actually did a very, very good job. He's probably tied with Gilbert Burns for having the closest fight with Chimaev, but ultimately a very dominant first round and continued wrestling and takedowns throughout the round. Won Chimaev the fight by a decision. It was pretty dominant from Chimaev, but Usman did have a very good performance given the circumstances. Now onto his opponent, Joaquin Buckley. He is a very hungry up-and-comer who's had a pretty average career at middleweight and sort of managed to bounce back at welterweight, where he's gone on an absolute tear. He's won 6 of his last fights at welterweight, and it capped it out with a really nice win over Colby Covington recently. Yes, it was stopped short. It was stopped early by the doctors due to a cut above the eye of Covington, and yes, it was sort of a late-minute Covington replacement fight with Covington stepping in with about 2-ish weeks, maybe even less. But in that fight, Buckley beat up on Covington the whole fight and defended almost any of the takedowns that Covington was trying to get him with. He almost finished Covington with a submission in the 3rd round, but ended up surviving that round. The doctors came in, called off the fight. Early, yes, but still. But before that, he had a decently close fight with Stephen Thompson where he was actually losing on the feet. He was keeping it close though. Wonderboy's karate style was very challenging for him to overcome, being the shorter fighter in this fight, but he was overcoming it with takedowns and wrestling. But in the 3rd round, he sort of blitzed in, got Thompson up against the cage and connected right with his chin as he backed out against the cage, put him out cold that fight. And even when he isn't finishing opponents, he still puts up very good performances, with his last decision coming from Nursultan Ruziboev. And in this fight, he just dominated Ruziboev, especially for the wrestling. He won the first 2 rounds mainly through the wrestling. He knocked him down the 3rd as well, landed some really brutal ground and pound in that 3rd round. And just won that fight 30-27 on the cards. And while I think Usman is one of the greatest welterweights to ever exist, and his recent losses aren't really indicative of his overall skill, he's been placed in some very unfortunate matchups. He's been out of the UFC for a while now, 2023, and all that time Buckley's just been grinding. He's been staying active, he's been staying hungry, consistently training, turning around, fighting, and I think he is very, very well-rounded. I think he's more well-rounded than Usman, actually, so I think he will beat him in every area of the fight. I can't see an area where Usman will excel that much over Buckley. And Buckley just seems like he wants it more. If you've been looking at his social medias, he's been posting day in, day out about how hard he's training, how badly he wants to win. And it is honestly kind of pushing me towards that direction. So I'm going to go with Joaquin Buckley to win this one. And I'm going to say he's going to get done by round 4 TKO. So yeah, guys, that's it. That was UFC Fight Night, Usman versus Buckley. All my predictions for the fights. Right now on the screen, all my predictions, all of Cam's predictions. Hopefully I do better this week because I got absolutely slumped by Cam last week. But yeah, this is a very, very fun fight card. It's not like the most stacked per se, but there are some really good fights. Garbrandt's back. The main event is like crazy. Wellmaker on the prelims, he's very like underrated in my opinion. Ricky Simone, I always love watching him fight. There's some really sneaky good fights on this card, so yeah, next week, well, breakdown card coming soon, but next week, Hill vs Roundtree, very excited for that as well. We're eating good as UFC fans in the next couple of weeks, and yeah, bye bye.